So what happened when Jesus died? Shortly after his death, we take a look at what happened, and those historical scholars we've already referred to, in general, agree with three facts.
The video you're about to watch gives some really solid historical evidence for the death and resurrection of Jesus. Personally, I'm baffled that I wasn't taught any of this in school, because this is really solid evidence for Christianity, and it's going to be presented to you in under 10 minutes. Let's go.
What are the sources regarding Christianity? And some of you might be even asking, Nabil, why should I even believe Jesus is real? Why should I ever even believe that he's a man who existed? The first thing I'm going to start off by telling you is that it is incontrovertible according to the historical principles of investigation that a man named Jesus existed in the first century. How do we know this? We have over 40 records of Jesus' life from ancient times describing this man who is essentially a carpenter in Palestine. He didn't have much of anything. He wasn't a centrally important figure at the time, yet we have 40 sources that refer to him. You know who the emperor was at Jesus' time? Someone shout it out. Tiberius. Good. Tiberius was the emperor of Rome at that time. Now this is a man who obviously we should have a lot written about. We can expect tons and tons of records about this man, can't we? The historical records contain Tiberius' name by 10 different individuals. That's it. 10 for Tiberius, the emperor of Rome, 40 for Jesus. You can see we have excellent reason to believe that this man, Jesus of Nazareth, lived and existed in the first century. And that's why very few, in fact I could probably count it on one hand, actually I know of two, scholars who study the historical Jesus actually claim that Jesus never existed, and one of them is Bob Price, who most other scholars say is just not even possible what he says. Keep in mind, there is an entire area of historical studies called historical Jesus studies. So we have scholars who've been studying this on all sides. These aren't all Christians by any means. Actually, the most influential ones wouldn't align themselves with Orthodox Christianity. You have people like Paula Fredrickson, Marcus Borg, Bart Ehrman. You have people along these lines who would say, like John Dominic Crossan, who would say that of Jesus we can know for a fact that he died on the cross. Now keep in mind, that's one of our 3 points that we're proving for Christianity, or attempting to show to determine its reliability. Did Jesus die on the cross? The scholars who study his life, regardless of whether they're atheist, Buddhist, agnostic, Hindu, Christian, it doesn't matter. They all conclude that Jesus died on the cross. Now, if I left it there, it would be an appeal to authority, and we're trying to be academically rigorous tonight, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you some of their reasons why they believe Jesus died on the cross, but we're going to keep it brief because scholars are unanimous on this issue. By the way, it's not just them. Even Muslim scholars will argue that Jesus did die on the cross. How many of you heard of Reza Aslan's book recently, Zealots, that came out this year? A few of you? Reza Aslan's a scholar who has studied the historical Jesus, and as a Muslim he says, yes, Islam denies Jesus' death on the cross, and I am a Muslim, but I confirm that Jesus' death on the cross is historically certain. So why do they say this? Well, because first off, all the evidence that we have, all the records of Jesus' life which talk about his death indicate that he did die. If they say anything, it says that he did die on the cross under Pontius Pilate, which is why Paula Fredrickson says, if there's anything we can know about Jesus, anything at all, it's this, that he died on the cross under Pontius Pilate. So we have excellent reason to believe Jesus died on the cross because all the records point to that. Plus, if you study the historical process of crucifixion, nobody ever in the entire history of the Roman process of crucifixion, no one ever survived a full Roman crucifixion. So we have excellent reason to believe Jesus died on the cross. Did he rise from the dead? This is an important matter. And lots of historians say we cannot investigate the resurrection because that's not a historical matter. That's a supernatural matter. And you can't study supernatural matters. Well, that's jumping the gun just a bit. If every explanation that is naturalistic falls short and falls very short of explaining what happened, then we have reason to believe that something supernatural may have happened. So what happened when Jesus died? Shortly after his death, we take a look at what happened, and those historical scholars we've already referred to, in general, agree with 3 facts that are considered relatively incontrovertible. And I'm giving you what's called the minimal facts argument. If you want to look into this, it's called the minimal facts argument, primarily promoted by a man named Gary Habermas, who's written a book called The Historical Jesus. Also by his protege, Michael Licona, who's written a book called The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. He wrote it alongside Gary Habermas. The argument runs as follows. Pretty much every scholar who studies this, at least a vast majority, if not virtually all scholars, conclude three things happened after Jesus died. Well, number one, the first one is that Jesus did die on the cross, which we just looked at. Number two, that the disciples, Jesus' disciples, all believed he had risen from the dead. Now get me right here. That doesn't mean he did just because they believed it, but it means they did sincerely believe it. They went to their death believing Jesus died and rose and appeared to them. So it's that belief that we're holding on to. Not necessarily that he did, but they sincerely believed he had risen from the dead. And why do they conclude that, by the way? All the disciples ran away from Jesus. When he was arrested, they were fearful. They didn't know what was going on. Even Thomas, who was willing to go to his death for Jesus, when Jesus was arrested, they all ran away. Of course, we know John watched the crucifixion, and we do know that Peter came to the trial scene, but at least at that time, they all ran away. However, after the resurrection, these men were willing to go to their deaths proclaiming that Jesus had risen from the dead. These men were willing to die for the fact that this man had risen. Again, that doesn't mean he had actually risen, that we're not there yet. But it does mean they sincerely believed it, because liars make poor martyrs. People aren't going to die for a lie or something that they know is false. Of course, people die for things that are false all the time, but not things that they know are false. And fact number three, people who were enemies of Jesus or not his disciples also believed he had risen from the dead. Now, who are we talking about? We're talking specifically about two people, James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, as it were. James, the brother of Jesus, did not follow Jesus during his lifetime. We see in the book of Mark that Jesus' family comes up and says to people around Jesus that he is out of his mind, basically, that he's crazy, which is what leads Jesus to say, "Who is my mother and brother and sister?" It's those who do the will of God. So Jesus' family is not on his side. It wasn't until after the resurrection, or supposedly the resurrection, when all of a sudden the disciple James the brother of Jesus, James, becomes a leader of the Christian church. And also Saul of Tarsus. Who is this Saul guy? Saul was the student of Gamaliel, one of the chief leaders of the Jews in the time. This man was primed and groomed to be a leader of Jews, a leader of Pharisees. He was going to have all kinds of power in the temple. He already had all kinds of power because he was able to deliver people to prison. He was given special permission to hunt Christians down. Yet this man was willing to go to his death over and over and over again for something. For what? He claims it was because he has seen the risen Jesus.
Was Jesus' tomb found empty on the third day? Was Jesus even buried in a tomb? The answer to both of these questions is yes. We know from ancient historical sources that the Romans allowed for crucifixion victims to be buried after they were crucified. We read in the Digesta, the bodies of persons who have been punished should be given to whoever requests them for the purpose of burial. We also know that the Jews buried people immediately after they had been executed. We read in Deuteronomy chapter 21 verse 23, "His body shall not remain all night on the tree, but you shall bury him the same day. For a hanged man is cursed by God. You shall not defile the land that the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance." And yes, sometimes the Jews refer to the cross as a tree. We see in the book of Acts chapter 10 verse 9 that the apostle Paul says that Jesus was killed by hanging on a tree. Okay, but was Jesus' tomb actually found empty on the third day? Well, just think about it for a moment. We know that there were people living in the first century that absolutely hated Christianity. Both the Jews and the Romans were doing everything that they possibly could to bring an end to Christianity. Whether that be chopping people's heads off, crucifying people, or stoning people, they did everything that they could to stop the spread of Christianity. But the easiest way for the Jews or the Romans to absolutely destroy Christianity would have been for them to simply dig up the dead body of Jesus. Literally, that's it. If Christians are out here busy saying that Jesus rose from the dead, the easiest way to completely end Christianity is to just present the corpse of Jesus and be like, you see, he hasn't been raised from the dead. Christianity is obviously false. But of course, they didn't do that because Jesus actually did rise from the dead, and he is, in fact, the king of the world. Really quickly, if you guys do want a really in-depth, nerdy explanation on all the historical evidence behind the resurrection of Jesus, I have made a video about that on my channel. I will leave it linked down below.